I'm going to mention a little bit about something that I brought up last week again. Some of you may or may not know we have people in other cities who are seeing some of these tapes, hearing some of the tapes from some years back, who've had only a cursory exposure to me, such as a public meeting. And I have encouraged them, not to be pen pals, but to write me at the slightest urge. And one area that continually comes up with these people, and it comes up with you people, it comes up with you non-verbally, is this question that seems to be sincerity toward other people. And I was mentioning last week, again apropos of the feeling that some people have for a while, that this is in some way distancing me from other people, from ordinary relationships. This is so strange in words in the beginning that it would not be unexpected that some of these people would hear such as this verbally after being exposed to me and the whole geography that I have mapped out of this thing. It would not be surprising for them to turn around and leave immediately. There's one reason I do not push it, but I understand that everyone, to varying degrees for a while, feels as though this is a very stringent problem. Your relationship with others, in particular blood kin and your parents. It's not only you, but you see it reflected in the ordinary world. That is considered to be the central problem in psychology of human relationships. But this feeling of distance, and then the way that some of these people, not unexpectedly, take what they think I have said about acting, that this would be some form of insincerity, and that on the contrary, what is needed is for people to be more sincere with one another, that there is nothing to be gained by putting on some kind of act with your parents or with anyone else. But here is what cannot faithfully be explained in words, and here I go again, is the feeling of distance. And I don't mean just what I have brought up that some of you people express, but out in life. Everyone feels to varying degrees as though they are estranged, and particularly among family, among the person with whom they become sexually involved, that there is some kind of gulf. We cannot communicate properly. This gap, in truth, is quite natural and necessary, but insofar as it being bridged in some way, the only way that would be possible would be through real acting and not merely reacting to the mechanical behavior of the other person. Now, what ordinary people would think of as being sincerity is simply their own mechanical reactions to the mechanical behavior of other people. And those of you that have gotten anything out of this by now have some taste of the fact, without worrying about people being blind machines, because they're not. People are people. But you have, all of you that's been here with any length of time, have a distinct taste of the fact that by and large you're out of control. That is, unless you are prepared to tell me what you're going to say next. You're not out of control on the basis, those of you here and those of you that I have some knowledge of in other places, you're not out of control to the point that you are about to, let us hope, take off your clothes and cover yourself with barbecue sauce and run in the street. Or that there's perhaps no danger that at any moment now you're this close to becoming a mad killer with butcher knives in both hands. And yet, on what seems to be a rather mundane, routine level, all of you now have some distinct taste that in a way in which I can operate, that I have operated and I can see now I could live out my appointed days, making no further effort, but in truth I do not know what I'm going to say next, much less 20 years from now. I don't know what I was going to say next, looking backwards 20 years. So to that degree, there is something else afoot. And then my description of life having a life of its own becomes more and more apt. That there is something else going on, and it's not simply subconscious motivations. It is not simply childhood traumas trying to express themselves in subconscious manners. There is actually a life force going on, and we are in it, and I open my mouth and things come out. The truth be known. And of course only the few qualify for the truth be known. Everyone else says it. The truth be known, my mouth opens. I don't know what I'm going to say, but so far nobody's killed me. I haven't been arrested for what I said. It hasn't satisfied me. It does not seem to close this apparent gap, this estrangement between me and other people. And yet I open my mouth, I make gestures, I go here and I go there, and seen from a certain unnatural viewpoint, it just happens. No less so for everyone else, including my mother and father, my sexual mate. What they call ordinary people sincerity is at best them being concerned without knowing it, insofar as the difference between what I have labeled for you temporarily the public and the private voice. That apparently there is a level of sincerity that the greater reality, the ordinary flow of everyday human affairs seems to demand. But then there can be such a divergence in a person between their public voice that is paying lip service to it and then a private voice such as a con man, to make an extreme example that covers almost all possibilities if you can follow it. His public voice says, yes, I can put aluminum siding on your house at a reasonable cost. I can guarantee it with no conditions for 30 years, and you can trust me to have it up in a fashion with which you will have no complaints, and it will be done within 2 weeks. Where's my check? And the private voice has no intention of doing it. The private voice has already translated the mechanical flow between the salesman, the con man, and the potential conee, customer, that the person's going to go for it. Taking that as an all-inclusive extreme example, then what ordinary people say about being insincere falls within that. That, all right, my public voice wants to tell this girl, listen, you're beautiful, and I don't normally hang around bars and pick up people. But in your case, I'm going to make an exception. Whereas this private voice is saying, oh my God, is she really going to go home with me? I'd tell her anything. And vice versa for women nowadays, I guess. Or, when it gets down closer to what seems to be the personal inquiries that, and fears that people have in the beginning after hearing what they think I said, that there would be some kind of grave insincerity to turn to your mother and say, you know, there's nobody like you, and I guess for years I was just human. I thought I had imaginary complaints about you, and there's nothing I can tell you in words except, you know, there's nothing like you, and you've got to be the greatest one in the world, and if love exists, then what I feel for you has got to be the living epitome of it. The people want to say, wait, now that's easy to say, but I would be insincere doing that because you don't know what my mother did to me. You don't know what a flying witch she can be even to this day, how she harps on me, how she tries to make me feel guilty, etc., etc. That this would be doing no one any good because I would be being insincere. That is the nature of ordinary human intercourse. Anyone who believes otherwise is anyone. That is the nature of what I have in the past referred to you as the tensile or the tension, but the tensile strength that is a part of the circulatory system that holds everything together here. That there is that kind of estrangement that people do upon the first exposure to my great equation of I plus not I equals everything is, well, yes, that about covers it. It's I, and then it's the estrangement, that is plus. And then it is that to which, or from which, I am estranged, which you about covered it, includes just about, by God, everything else. Everything that's not me, I'm kind of estranged from to some degree. I'm trying to work it out through religion, through psychology, through drinking, through drugs. But you should note by now, without any pessimism, it is simply the natural structure of things, that has always been, and it's still in existence. What I refer to as real acting is totally different from simply mechanically reacting to others. So in the sense of what they want to call sincerity, I am telling you, should not be called sincerity. It is doing what one must do. Not only you, but the other person. So once it is seen they are out of control, whether it's your mother, whether it's your sexual partner, they are out of control. As godlike at some age as your mother and father may have appeared, your mother and father did not know what they were going to say next. In a sense, it is a fortuitous accident that you got raised without being killed or maimed or them putting out one of your eyes or throwing you in a bag in the river. But they are as out of control as anyone else. They are part of the living structure of the life of life. To treat them in the manner that ordinary people want to call sincere is simply mechanically reacting to their own mechanical reactions. And any notion of closing some kind of gulf, any notion about becoming closer to another person through this, you have got to have some notion as to the outcome. I have pointed it out, I've given you tricks and tasks, but even you newer people, just me saying it, if you belong in this, you should get some taste of something. It's not cynicism, it's not attack on your parents, there's nothing wrong with life. But this feeling of estrangement is a part of the gap between everyone. It is part of the purpose in what all the circuits. And from one viewpoint, since we're talking about this, you could say that from one viewpoint it would apparently be a prime task of the blue department, of advertising, promotion, is to transfer energy. But there is this gap here. There is this estrangement between everyone, or there would be no necessity to transfer it. And so the idea that, all right, I feel estranged, I feel in some way, let me say, a negative charge between me and the other person, I want to turn it into a positive charge. Well, you can turn it into a positive charge, apparently, momentarily. But then it's subject to go back to something else. It is always subject to change. It's why, for a long time, I denied the fact that what is called love, or some kind of positive blue circuit transfer, should not actually be called love. It is simply a temporary flow, and sometimes I feel good about this person, but like as not, I don't feel good toward the person. I may be paying lip service like everyone else, that, well, my mother's my mother, and certainly I love her and I send her a card on Mother's Day. But a real act is to free oneself from simply reacting to the negative or to the mechanical behavior of the other person. That closes a gap. That begins to bridge a gap in a way that nothing else will. And when I have talked to some of you personally, and I have mentioned this on several occasions to everyone about trying to close accounts with your parents, the necessity of absolutely doing away with these running, quite ordinary and routine arguments with your parents, even if they're dead, that you've got to see it for what it is. It is just simply a stronger estrangement than you feel toward everyone else. That it has got to be stopped. It is unprofitable to say the very least, and it will stop you at a certain point. But what would seem to be insincerity from a very ordinary viewpoint, that I said that people would be well within their rights if I talk like this at some public occasion, for many people to say, well, this is absolute insanity. This is inhumane. Or it's some kind of sham. Those of you who have tried it, those of you who hear any of it, and I've given you tests very recently, complimenting people who had done you no favor at all, trying to feel, quote, loving toward a stranger, something should be seriously investigated if any of you faithfully attempted to do those two tasks, for instance, and then felt as though it was some kind of negative, or it was some kind of sham act that I put you up to some kind of trickery to go out and irritate strangers. The truth is, nobody used these particular words, but the numerous notes I got out of those two tasks. I wasn't going to dwell on or read a lot of them, because we're not here to encourage you to fall into just another level of mundane blue circuit activity. But many of you wrote me notes, just little short sketches about suddenly you felt closer to people than you had ever felt in your life, based upon some mechanical task I gave to a stranger, that the one complimenting the salesperson on some great deed they'd done for you in the past when they had not done it. Now, from one viewpoint, that should be the epitome of insincerity. And yet, how do you explain the fact that many of you noted, I felt so close to the person, and something happened, I could tell that they were feeling something toward me in this whole situation that they would not normally feel. Sincerity is not in mechanical behavior. And real acting, once you understand what it is not any form of insincerity. And in fact, it is not any form of an act. It is the only proper course of action for someone who understands, someone who is far from it sufficiently to see the circulation, the transfer of energy that's taking place throughout life, including your parents, your loved ones, people you like, people you hate, to be removed from it enough to see it. In a sense, I can say that what I am now calling real acting is the only possible form of behavior available. Because you're certainly not going back and engage in the mechanical dance in which they have always, if you'd known them before, wanted to tap to with you or with strangers. It's obvious what they seem to be wanting, what seems to be the necessary participation of you in relationship to them. And you certainly can't go back and do that, except on the most superficial of levels, if it's just something passing and somebody makes some comment. You say, yeah, right. You cannot go back and engage in some kind of behavior, even if it just be conversation with people, that is going to encourage them along mechanical lines. So in that sense, it is the epitome of sincerity. You are not necessarily going to help other people. But you have done one thing. This is not the purpose of it. But some of you have seemed to enjoy me pointing this out, that you got something out of it, or you should have used it to investigate it further. You have, everybody from strangers to your family, to your parents. By ceasing to simply react to their mechanical behavior, you have set up, at least in their lifetime, the singular possibility, at one time at least, that your mother, your father, your sexual partner had the opportunity of seeing something out of the ordinary, of experiencing something out of the ordinary. And I by no means guarantee that it's going to happen. Even if it does happen, do not expect it to be some kind of continuing great change on their part. But if you cease to simply react to the mechanical behavior of other people, of course you've got to know how to do it, and you've got to be able to see what it is, or else you're just following tasks that I gave you. But once you see that, then the whole relationship changes, and they cannot engage you nor themselves fully in the same kind of mechanical dance, the same kind of mechanical transfer of energy that may have been established and going on for 40 years. It will stop the particular pattern in which you people had been dancing. But it, in fact, comes closer to bridging a gap between you and other people. It comes closer to soothing a feeling of estrangement, simply because you can see it and you will no longer engage in it. Part 2. Many of you should be close enough to hear this as soon as I say it. Somebody even last week, if you recall, I read a paper about someone noting avant-garde music of a particular kind they heard and wondering if life would continually play to a limited audience. And I made some response to that in a different way. But that and some other things that some of you have brought up, I was going to wrap up temporarily into a small ball of pointing. And that is, it is life's present increasing short attention span. It is a fact. It has increased dramatically in my lifetime, and almost all of you involved with this now are almost old enough that you can feel that it has speeded up. Sociologists and psychologists, I'm generally aware, have made some note of this over the last decade or more, about things changing at such a rate of speed. Technology moving at such a rate of speed that it's almost disorienting to some people. Let me put it to you better, and that is, it's increasingly so. An increasingly short attention span of life itself, and then it's reflected in man. And right now I would point your attention, if you care to pursue this, which you can get a lot out of, in a sense, to quote myself, if nobody else, you can begin to find answers to things that you thought were inexplicable. They just begin to make more sense if you can begin to feel it that way. You can feel it in you. If you had the correct feeling of history of your own nervous system since you've been alive, you should be able to feel it. And you can see it, you can hear it talked about under various guises through a wide spectrum of people. But especially in this part of the world. Now we've got to talk about where the yellow circuit is firmly grounded and is almost the focal point. We're talking about the yellow story. Now, the little further pointing I was going to give you about this increasingly short attention span of life, I was going to point out directly, has to do with yellow circuit activity moving so fast. And that the attention span of life itself, I keep picking on this, but I find the erstwhile proclamation from many quarters of the great benefits, the prediction of it being in every home of personal computers only 18 months ago. And now there's hardly any mention of it. And I have used that example for slight variations of this, I know, in the last several months. But you can look around in areas that have to do specifically with yellow circuit, technology, development of ideas, political philosophies. Of course, you've got to be able to free yourself from the messenger, from the mouthpiece, of believing that this is groups of men, or a man over here doing something. It is life mumbling. It's life theorizing. It is life talking to itself, or if life had a drinking buddy, it's them sitting out under a tree, and the life we're in saying, after 2 or 3 good cold beers, and after being hot and sweaty all day, and suddenly alcohol hits him, or it, he says, you know what I'm going to do? I've always wanted to. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to do so-and-so. Just like you've done many times. And the next day, somebody'd have to bring it up to you, and then maybe you would remember saying that. But you, in the other life, may have sat there under that tree and had 4 or 5 more beers, and both of you get engaged in, hey, that's a great idea. Maybe I'll join you. Then you have 1 or 2 more, and by God, I'll do it. It's like I have suddenly seen the light. I was unclear as to exactly what I should do, but now I know. Give me another beer and let's talk some more. And the next day, like it never happened. Taking into account the change in dimensions, of course, it is not unlike what happens in human life, because there is nothing going on in the body of life that is unlike what's going on in life, and vice versa. Which I guess I should include as the 3rd big shock. But I was going to leave the first 2 shocks. That'll be the 3rd one. As the yellow circuit activity moves faster and faster, the attention span of life itself gets shorter and shorter. Now, it is leading to something, as I've told you. Right now, it has to do with the way it comes out in humanity with a particular kind of discomfort. Again, not making more out of it than it is, and it's got nothing to do with us living in a very dangerous age, and it's got nothing to do with an imagined apocalyptic time upon us. But everything, in a sense, is a new arrangement at all times. So right now, humanity is going through a kind of discomfort that is singular. It is not the same kind of discomfort that your grandparents' generation was experiencing. And the discomfort has to do with this gap that's going on with the yellow circuit about to wind up, that department is about to reach a point that's as far as it's going to go. There's going to be a new level built on the building. It's already started. You already got the roof, the yellow story, which in a sense is simply the floor to the new story, but a kind of discomfort. But the particular kind is that the yellow circuit is moving so fast. The yellow circuit is about to wrap up. It's about to reach its max. And as this increases and moves faster and faster, and what seems to be life's attention span at the yellow circuit level in itself and in humanity gets shorter and shorter. And you'll see that there are more and more. There'll be increasingly bursts of things that will strike not necessarily just you, but will strike enough people that it makes large write-ups in major newspapers or magazines that, hey, here's the brand new thing. And you may read it, and let's say that does strike you somewhere, even at the most mechanical levels. For 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, more and more is written about it. And grabbed at your most mechanical level, if somebody jumped out and said, what would you say is the most important area of human life right now? Without hesitation, you might say it was such and such. And you could back it up. But you'll begin to note there'll be increasing numbers of that you can spot going on, and suddenly it's like it just never existed. And instead of the major magazines for a while in the country, just a few months back were just loaded with ads for home computers. Not just ads, there were write-ups everywhere, as you people obviously surely know. It was just treated as a fait accompli that any household that could qualify as being civilized, any parent that has the welfare of their child who would like to, in fact, make their life easier, it's just, it's a matter of time. It's not, are you going to have a home computer? It's, are you going to have one this week? Or are you going to wait till next year and get all behind everybody else? It was just everywhere. Now there's just hardly any mention of it. Of course, all of this, as interesting as it may be, and will begin, or can show you ways that answers become clear over a horizon that you thought was limited to the questions themselves, and it's tied to the answer once you change the perspective. But you can find within yourself that same increased tempo going on. It's like being able to eat up a new hobby, a new idea, or I believe what I'll do is I'll start reading, I'll keep up with physics today. Or I believe I will, finally, I'm going to take up to learn how to play the alto harp. I'll buy one, I'll get every book available, and I'll sit at home and I'll go strum, 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 and you do it for 2 or 3 weeks, and it's... And worse yet, for those of you who like to always get worse yet, look how fast, since some of you have been around here a few years, look how fast I have to conjure up new maps and then abandon them. If you recall, a week or so ago, I was reading a note here from someone who had been around here for a good while, and they somewhat questioningly noted in a questioningly manner, that I did not seem to be going back to the basics all over you newer people or on these tapes going out to other places, to seem to be covering the more basic elements. It just seemed like I'm just not even mentioning it anymore. Guess they got me. Or I guess they got themselves. All right, I'm going to mention several things that would seem to be tied to religion, since I gave you that task, trying to get you to neuralize, ponder, investigate, and consider on your own what is it that religion seems to be serving. A couple of things that I have run across in a fly-by-night manner. In the past, there was an example in the last week that the titular head of one of the world's major religions was quoted widely as commenting again upon that religion's stand on moral issues. In particular, it happened to be abortion, birth control, and homosexuality. And this leader of, I guess it is the world's largest religion, I guess, stated that notwithstanding attempts to liberalize the church, that these teachings, among others, but that the church's teaching is handed down from the gods through the founders of the church, were immutable. They were timeless. They would stand forever. Case closed. All right. It's also a known fact, if I know it, that every year or so, rather independent agencies such as major newspapers do surveys. And I know I've seen one in the last year that this same religion, they question the followers, at least in the Western world, the United States and Europe, which were it not for them, this particular religion, and almost all religions now would fall apart, but this particular religion would be yesterday's news. They do a survey enough to satisfy those kind of pollsters that they are getting a good reading of the people. And they ask them, do they agree with the church's stand? That is, the expressed views of the leadership of the church. Do they agree with them on, and this being some of the major issues confronting that religion and supposedly humanity in general now, birth control and abortion? And that the vast majority, the last figure that I recall was, if I'm not mistaken, was somewhere between 70 and 80% of those disagreed. They identified themselves as being faithful, self-identified followers of this religion, and yet disagreed, so they did not believe it. They did not agree with the church's interpretation. Now I'll give you a second to we will still assume that I am dealing even with you new people, that I'm dealing with people that have the ability to get beyond words, that have the ability to get beyond the noise of traffic, beyond the noise of the circulatory system and the digestive system of life itself, making noise and burping and belching, crying out great ideas, and then to try and ask yourself, what kind of situation has been set up to what purpose that a large number of people, let's just take this one religion, assuming it's the largest or one of the world's largest religions, and the majority in the civilized world of its adherents, those who identify themselves, disagree with what the church says. And the church periodically, through its titular head, states unequivocally, these things are timeless truths. They cannot be altered by simple whims of the public. The truth of God's cannot be changed simply by people marching in the streets and sending me nasty letters and laughing at my clothes. And the situation, though, not only in this religion, but every religion, I'm just using this as one example, yet the situation has been rather stable, By name, this organization has continued to exist for we're close to 2,000 years. Seems to be healthy, wealthy, if not wise. So what is going on? Since I'm sure you would have jumped to this, let me not change the subject while doing so verbally. Has anyone given any attention to the fact that after the so-called oil shortage scare, and on a national level they lowered the speed limits, you remember, on the interstates from 70 to 55, and then economically, you might say, forced the states to apply the same speed limits to their state highways, at least they lose federal funds, that now, nationwide, the speed limit is 55. You know, what kind of economic position would you be in if you had, say, $1 for every car that actually goes 55 on the interstate? And yet, the law is still there, and to a larger degree, we might say, of drivers, as opposed to those who disagree, those religious adherents that disagree with their church's following, even a larger degree, see the sign, ignore it, and by and large, it's not enforced, and yet it's there. Now, I don't guess the highway, the transportation department, would agree with my terms, but does anyone see any connection between that and that great dynamic constant in human affairs known as SIN? The continuing extant speed limit of 55 being exceeded and not generally enforced. Can anyone see that that is sin? Can anyone see that nothing is amiss for life to speak in one segment of its body through apparently one man or one organization saying, all right, here are a few non-debatable, non-negotiable, timeless truths. And yet the majority of those who identify themselves as being part of that religion disagree with it and don't follow it. On the contrary, as to anything being amiss, some of you, it gives me even small time, or it gives me pleasure to find some of you now writing me notes and giving me looks, that you begin to see the beautiful situation and you realize that you can't even tell me how beautiful it is because I couldn't tell you exactly why it was situated that way, but now that you begin to glimpse it, it ranges from astonishment, absolutely delight, wherein at the ordinary level, at one time, you can still remember that I looked upon this as being just part of the whole cynical, the whole foolish, probably the whole self-destructive nature of life. And now I realize it's not, or I begin to get glimpses of it, that there is nothing cynical. There's no sarcasm involved. There is no form of criticism apropos from me to look now upon large groups of people, the ex-religion, and they all holler, we're in favor of so-and-so. The head of the church says it, and a whole bunch of people go, amen. They let out church, and 99% of them go and do otherwise. There's nothing to go tut, 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 or to go off and suddenly be so cynical, God forbid, that you become a poet, or even worse, you become a politician. There's nothing wrong. Once you begin to see it, I challenge everyone, improve upon it. How could you hold everything together? How could you, by what you then begin to glimpse as the continuing creative flow of life, always expanding, always getting more conscious, how else could you arrange it for this to happen than the way it's arranged? I will take 1 second, figuratively speaking, to refer you back. Most of you should have caught enough of a whiff of something to pursue it on your own. But the head of this particular religion that normally makes the first 1 or 2 pages on his major pronouncements to say that these particular issues of morality are timeless. But now all of you know that insofar as talking about what would be the see thing in the real kinetic mode, that is, talking about the area in life's body, wherever it might be at any particular time, that is growing the fastest, that is growing in the most direct manner possible. In that place, you do understand, enough of you get a whiff, the idea of a timeless truth. I mean, it's not wrong, it's not laughable, it's irrelevant. It simply exists in a lower dimension. It simply exists in another area of life's body where nothing is happening. Or if you must, those of you who are fairly virgin to what I talk about and the way in which I talk about it, I will go ahead and point it out, that there is no such thing as a timeless truth. Of course, most of you have heard me say that, or you have to see it for yourself. But notice it has an effect. That this one person, it's happened throughout history, but he can stand up today and say, listen, I know that people say times have changed, but let me tell you, there are a few things here that the gods have told us that are timeless. Now, in the overall expansion and growth of life, that is simply not true. But insofar as keeping everything in balance, there are not enough people on this planet who understand it. And of course, those who understand it wouldn't disagree. So you've got to follow what I'm talking about that doesn't exist in possibility, even in words. It just sounds like it could be. That life does not produce enough people in the major parts of its body to stand up and say, wait a minute. It can't be true, something's wrong, if this is a timeless, immutable fact, or this is some truth. How do you explain the fact, then, that the majority of people who say that they believe this, that is, this religion, don't believe this? Of course, then the answer is sin. The people are deluded. They're further and further away from the truth. So that which I'm telling you that as always, the fact at the most creative, in the most creative area of life's body, that there is no such thing as a timeless truth. That as I've already noted tonight, the faster you begin to hear, the faster things move, the shorter becomes life's attention span. Things that I could say, they just seem to be to many people. It varies from time to time, but some astounding, almost a flash, that there is the ultimate truth, and you put it into words. It just hit me. That one sentence, there's a couple of sentences I covered down last year that I knew my life would never be the same. You know, what was it? Well, wait a minute. It was something having to do with, and I'm not laughing at you, and I'm not laughing at what I said. As it moves faster and faster, it's not a matter of, all right, here is a timeless truth that the God sent down 5,000 years ago. Hell, that's not even the problem. It's what seemed to be beneficial, what seemed to be a useful map for you 2 months ago. Now it's a dead-end street. That what was true to you 2 months ago is now you can't call it untrue, but it's moot. It's useless. And so if you had to use ordinary conversation and someone said, hey, this is a very important idea, you might look at it and say, yeah, I remember that. And you say, boy, do you have some understanding of that? And let's assume that you went, well, you know, I think I do. To understand that and be able to use it every day, of course, I'm making all this up, and then it strikes you, use it every day. I hadn't even thought about it. But it's on the basis that now it took me somewhere else. It opened up something else, and a map is a map. And once you understand where you are, you do not walk around with a map saying, my God, Helen, look at this picture of the Eiffel Tower. Look how beautiful the Eiffel Tower is, and you're walking right past it. You know, and everybody keeps looking at the map. The map's more appealing than. How about another piece that seems to fall within the bailiwick of religion? Try and neuralize it from the various strange positions in which I try to gather us into. Do you find it curious that life, men, do not have a general condemnation for religion's failure to produce religious people. Now, of course, we're not talking about that same disspecific reality of the complexity of life wherein it has parts of its body that it makes people be critics of religion. I'm talking about the general overall tenor in the grid of human affairs wherein there is no general condemnation of religions, any religion, all religions, in some way of condemning it as it has failed because it does not produce. Christianity does not produce Christians. Judaism does not produce real Jews. Buddhism does not produce Buddhists. There is no general condemnation. Does anyone find that interesting? Of course, this is play acting, all this. Do you find it interesting? Rub my chin, by God, you better find it interesting, right? To be sure that I'm making this clear enough, life's body in large areas produces religions, as all of you know, all over the world. No group of people anywhere, whether they be people in cult areas still on this planet worshiping spirits of ancestors or frog gods, or whether it be the world's major religions. No group of people under a banner live up to the tenets of the religion. That's simply a fact. A scientific fact, not a religious fact, not a psychological fact. It's a scientific fact. It's based upon certain funny laws of physics and certain equations that cannot be put into 3 dimensions, but of course we will not go into that. But notice, there is no general condemnation. Everyone who joins up becomes a Muslim, whether they be born there or not, but they assume the identity of their nationality or their culture's religion. They say, yes, I'm a Muslim. And you say, well, does Islam really produce Muslims? You know, are you truly a slave of God? That is, can you truly live by what the gods told, peace be upon him, Uncle Muhammad? Well, no. Do you know anyone who can? No, but, no. Have you ever heard of anyone who can? Well, that's kind of unfair, because then life does produce stories that one time there was a guy that almost could. So, but you say, well, do you feel like you're getting closer? Well, how can I tell you? I try. Well, do you feel like that anybody's getting closer? Have you noticed anyone who seems more and more every day, or within some identifiable length of time, seem to become more and more of a real Muslim? Well, but there is no outcry. There is no general condemnation of the Muslims or any group saying, wait a minute, a large number of us have gotten together. We've tried to follow the rules. We admit we can't. We've listened to all the priests and imams and everyone preaching, reading to us. We've considered history insofar as we have tried to impartially interpret it. And as far as I can tell, from the founding of our religion, whether it been Moses, Buddha, when evidently, according to the stories, the gods came down and told this guy, tell the rest of the people such and such. As far as we can determine, no offense, but as far as we can determine, nobody has ever been a real Jew, Christian, Buddhist, etc. And this does not sit well, or this does not say much for this religion that you have been preaching to us. There is no such occurrence on this planet. Do anyone find that of scientific interest? Let me refer you back then to the 3 things, the C, D, and E. at least let me hint to you that I may not say much about, that what appears to be the actual, literal absence of a straight line phenomenon, of things going from here to there, be it a religion, be it a temporary aim you have, be it some aspect of life in religious, political areas, that it makes these wide-reaching statements that seem to strike many people as being valid, as being worthy of pursuit, and yet it never goes from here to there. And that at least I ask you the musical question. Well, some of you even guessed that I was hinting that what might appear to be disjointed in X dimension, if it moved into a more complex dimension, it might be seen as actually going, compared to disjointed, might be actually seen as almost a straight line phenomenon. That is, being able at one dimension to have a fair and accurate observation that life staggers. Things do not move in a straight line. Life will try and stagger around and try this and try that. Now that you note it from me, I can see it. It makes a lot of sense. It explains a lot. I can see for myself. But I was at least strongly hinting from if you could change the horizon, if you could move into a more complex dimension, it might not be quite that. What I was going to at least try and hint about the lack of general condemnation for the failure of religion to produce truly religious people. Could you see that that would be a closing, if it were possible at this level? It would be a closing of what is now an open-ended system. That if, by any definition, pick any religion's definition of what would be perfection, if that could be achieved, it would be suicide. It would be the chord progression going from C to D to E and then not being able to move. It would be the end of the song. Were it not for sin, as the religions call it, there would be no growth. Were it not for large areas of life's body proclaiming, here are timeless truths. Here are God-sent standards by which we must strive to live. It is the struggle. It is not some apparent victory. Because if there was apparent victory, if suddenly all of those who go under the banner of Christendom truly became Christians, and all of those who proclaim themselves Jews truly became Jews, and etc., it would be, all growth would stop. Back to me asking you, does anyone find it interesting that there is no general condemnation over, from one quite valid viewpoint, the failure of religions to produce religious people? It would be the flow of the forces. It would be the chord progression committing suicide. Man cannot be allowed to become rich and beautiful. That by any definition of what any group of people, what any religion would define as being perfection, there is no manner, it is not physically possible, it is not scientifically possible in the body of life for that to occur. And so the very dissatisfaction that the religions say that they are working for, that if you would indeed become a Buddhist or a Muslim, if you would truly succeed at it, if you in some way could give yourself over to this, then this suffering, which is brought on by sin, that is brought on by being separated from the gods, from their will, then this gap would be closed and you would be at peace. My hint to you, of course, is it is not condemned because life is not going to commit suicide. And that life has its own understanding on another level that there are ways in which I would grow in a more efficient manner. Did I have all of my parts operating in this fashion? How about love thy neighbor? What if it was all cells, love your fellow cells? Not treat them necessarily as yourself, but for kidneys to treat livers not as enemies, not as strangers. Or I've never met anybody that was purple. You're the ugliest. I've never met people like you. We don't want you in the neighborhood. It's to understand the liver's got to be in the neighborhood. It comes out in humanity. Love thy neighbor. Let's just use that as being kind of a common ground amongst all religions. Life has proclaimed that in numerous areas of its body. Numerous areas of this planet, if you want to take it that way, through numerous people, if you want to take it to that level. And yet, the few who have a glimpse of reality see beyond any mechanical level of sarcasm and cynicism. It has not happened, and in a sense, it doesn't seem to be a lot closer now than it ever was. Is this unusual? Are things out of kilter? Are things unbalanced? It's no. At one time, some time back, I gave as a kind of task for the people who were here then to try and tell me and themselves, and to write it down, what they would do if they had unlimited funds of constant money. I think I tried to give as an example $1 million a day tax-free, which should cover most contingencies. And I have asked several other little questions like that. And you could say, in a sense, that without actually having the experience of that, you can't really predict what you would do. But some of the people at that time tried to give what they considered to be a serious, insightful projection of what they might do. Some people, just wrote down the first thing that came to mind, and some people just couldn't seem to come up with anything that satisfied them. Connected to that is my continuing cry to you that if you got a hobby, pursue it. Develop it now. But I will tell you outright again, or for those who've never heard it, if you're operating at the ordinary level and you were freed of all what seems to be responsibility, whether you mechanically accepted parts of it as being tolerable and other parts just an absolute drag, that's religious talk for fairly unacceptable and inconvenient. But at the ordinary level, if you were freed from all of that, if you're an ordinary person, I am telling you outright, the majority of life's body, as reflected in men, would go to a stage of dissatisfaction, the likes of which they had never imagined. Their previous feeling of how inconvenient it is to try and finish school at night and have to hold down 2 part-time jobs, having to pay alimony to 2 previous wives, that would be nothing, literally. The way they would experience it if they were suddenly freed from it, that there were no responsibilities, and of course economics is just the focal point of me making up this little scene. But if a person under ordinary conditions was freed from all of what they would call responsibility, even if they used a more negative description, but of all responsibility, they would verge on being mad, but at least I'll leave it that they would reach a degree of dissatisfaction. They would be disconcerted in a way in which they had never experienced, even while holding down 3 jobs and paying alimony to 5 wives. That is a scientific fact. Or if people, I'll push it just a little bit further. I know even this, in a sense, I'm just saying this because without you having some taste of it, it's hard to put the words into a feeling of adequate experience. But everyone, to varying degrees, feel dissatisfied about the way they look. Now, whatever picture you had in mind, male or female, of either Jane Fonda or Robert Redford or whatever, that just, if my nose, if it just do like this, and if I knew that my hair was going to stay good and thick for the rest of my life like it was when I was 18, whatever, just if I look like Robert Redford and just with enough distinguishing, my nose turned a little bit or maybe my eyes a different color, just so that people wouldn't actually think I was him or whoever. If that was done, you would not be satisfied. Again, based upon the way in which you were wired in the beginning, that is, the degree to which you seem continually dissatisfied about the way I look. I can't keep my weight down. I've talked to people about straightening my nose or cutting down the size of my ears, the price involved, the pain involved. The surgeon didn't even seem that optimistic about it. But just the general overall feeling, to whatever degree you're dissatisfied, I continually read books about diets. I got hundreds of books on diets. I try them all. I go off of them. I worry about it. I spend as much time during the day, I bet if I timed it, just every time I go past any place that's got a reflection, I notice. And I'm always checking my clothes. I'm looking at other people to see if they've lost any weight. It seems as though it's a real burden. It seems like it's a drag of some kind. That God, if I had just been born with a different kind of metabolism, to where like so-and-so I see, they can eat 12 chocolate cakes for breakfast every day, and they never gain a pound. If I were just wired up like that, to the same degree that one seems dissatisfied, if suddenly you were turned into your idea of perfection, the sense of consciousness you have now, if that idea of perfection was brought to bear, was brought into reality, to a like degree, you would then reach another level of being dissatisfied. I repeat, it sounds perhaps crude and unbelievable, but you would be dissatisfied to a level that you would not imagine. I'm not saying if you're going to be real crude about it. I repeat, it sounds perhaps crude and unbelievable, but you would be dissatisfied to a level that you would not imagine. I'm not saying if you're going to be real crude about it, that as soon as the little magic fairy went boom and you looked in the mirror and you were Jane Fonda or Robert Redford, to go, wow. I'm not saying that's not true. I'm not saying you might not go wow for another several hours. I'm not saying that you would go out and borrow or rent a convertible so you could drive up and down the major thoroughfare of your city with the top down just so people could see you. It might even go on for several days. After several days, I'm telling you, there would be a degree of dissatisfaction that is indescribable. Men cannot be allowed to be rich and perfect. Men cannot be allowed at the ordinary level to be free of sin. They cannot be allowed to even live under what would seem to be political laws to which everyone can live, up to which everyone can live. That the thing that religion seems to be purporting from a certain viewpoint to humanity, that, all right, everyone feels sinful, don't you? Everybody goes, yeah. Well, that's what this religion is for. That God sent down the message of here's the way to free yourself from this disturbing feeling of being sinful. And it does not. It does not succeed. And yet nobody generally condemns it. It continues to exist and continues to say everyone is sinful. Everybody, admit it. You speed, and you know damn well the speed limit's 55. And you speed, don't you? Everybody goes, yeah, I do. This will cure you from speeding. And it doesn't. And yet nobody comes back. There is not a general clamor and condemnation of, wait a minute, you told us that you would cure us from speeding, and I still speed. Those of you that get a real glimpse, since I was laying on the word sin tonight, trying to get you to look in a certain direction, in as much as I'd been trying to get you to look at it, what seems to be the phenomenon of religion in a certain way. Sin is also tension. Sin is also the tensile strength between life's parts. But sin is not something that can be cured. Sin is not something that is going to be cured. Sin is not something that could be cured. It would be suicide. I got a task when we wrap it up. In case anybody wants to remember that particular place I brought up, that I got a task, because I'm just going to ignore that for the time being. Conclusion of this particular aspect of a funny physics sermon. The few are the only ones who will ever see this. And so you can't tell anybody outside this room. But man is guilty of only one sin, or he's guilty of naught but being human. My one for the week, the kind of questions, things I draw out. How about this? Why are not natural catastrophes condemned as killers the same way as individual humans are? I mean, life's civilized verbal body will rise up and spend much newsprint and airtime on radio and television condemning one man who kills 3 people. And a goddamn volcano will wipe out thousands of people, and there's no general condemnation about what's going on here, much less to blame it on you-know-who. I just thought I'd ask you. I was going to touch on several here I brought from some of your responses to my question as to what you could see that men, humanity, seem to be getting from religion. And people answered on several bases, and people answered it by taking what I said and changed it to seem to be getting, think they're getting, which was all fine. But several of them I was going to make some comment about, maybe. If I read it and don't make any comment, that meant that I was going to, sans comment, simply read it, which is obvious enough to me. It seems that some of what people get from religion is an opportunity for a wider awareness. Everyone has some form of religion on this planet, apparently, be it medicine men, churches, or philosophical/psychological theories. And it would seem to me that each one is designed to feed the highest level of those involved. Well, that's the only part I was going to read about this. The person specified, note, that whatever the form of religion, it seemed to them was designed to feed the highest level of those involved. Well, that is an interesting verbal observation. I'd never put in those kind of words, and I was going to note in response to this that you could say that's true. I could also say it's not true, and I'll tell you why right quick, like I always do. That religions are feeding the highest level of those involved, but what it is doing is feeding its own, that is life's own, today, highest level, the highest mechanical level. And that's what religion is doing. It is religion doing that when you have a case of 5,000 years ago. Some religion says you should love your neighbor as yourself. And yet the followers of that religion, en masse, still cannot do it. But it was life attempting to feed itself through humanity, to pass energy at the highest possible level mechanically. We're talking about at line level consciousness. And of course, we're talking about on a multidimensional level, a more complex dimensional level of life feeding itself at its own line level of consciousness. But that does no good for the few people, because what it will not do, what religion does not feed, is to feed the few tomorrow's food. case of another one. It would seem to me that the trick, they're referring to the numerous, or the several times I've used the definition and spoke on it and wrote on it once about the dynamics or the syndrome of wanting to get your desk clean every day. So it's in response to this, that this person has been neuralizing on their own, that the trick, I read, would seem not to be to get your desk clean. That's impossible. You just have to keep cleaning it. That's life. But the trick would seem to be to create your own invisible clean desk. Would anyone find any connection between that and an area in which one might be able to realize the something behind my term, neuralize? That you could create your own invisible clean desk, inasmuch as from one viewpoint it's not improperly put that you can't ever get your desk clean. Again, back to me asking about what religion might be attempting to serve, or apparently serving. Reading from this one, religion would seem to offer a formula into which a man could plug himself and feel that the equation has a positive value. Also, it would seem that religion offers a buffer between actions and apparent consequences. Same area as to what people are seeking in religion. The following question popped up to me as I considered this. Is it possible that life drives man to seek religious pursuits so that it, life, will live forever? The same ballpark or same game. It would seem religion seems to serve life as an almost universal vehicle. It has carried everything from government to medicine to information from unknown circuitry. It's almost like a pipeline to all parts of life's body. Here's the part I was getting at. Through which practically any kind of energy can be sent. That is an apt observation about one verbal defining, and even beyond that, of what religion can do. The person pointed out it would seem a pipeline to all parts of life's body through which practically any kind of energy can be sent. That is one of the continuing uses and practicalities of religion, as decrepit as the term is nowadays, as you can slip in a multitude, as it were, of sins, as long as you call it religion in some guise. Almost anything less, and you have conditioned it to the point that you have to come along later if you're going to try and feed all possible systems and circuits in those that would show up. If you called it almost anything short of religion, the day would come that you're going to try and feed some part of their circuitry, to try and touch one of the infrasystems, and you're going to have to say, ladies and gentlemen, I know that this is not what you would have been expecting from a religion. And so you would have to go through a preface. You would have to go through an apology as to what you were about to do. You'd have to go through an attempted explanation. And many of them would leave, even though the explanation may have seemed reasonable, logical. They weren't hurt by what followed after the activity. But many people forever, the way things are wired up, would feel as though I have either been tricked or I have been shortchanged. Another one, perhaps religion is life's unknown gift for man's temporary relief, like a cold pack to soothe an aching head, a hidden relief from the continual pulsing of I-ness. On considering religion, etc., I observed a girl in a rural, I'm putting this together as I read, a girl in a rural environment at a gospel service appeared to get up and to go into some kind of would-be state of ecstasy and seemed to lose almost all control over the red circuit. Or seemed to lose control and the red circuit seemed to take over. I assume most of you are familiar with that. I was just going to make a short comment regarding that. When you get into the areas wherein it was the minors, when you get into the area wherein it was a red circuit-centered people, and their state of what seemed to be some kind of religious ecstasy, I would point you, even today, at this first, as sex. They can't see it. And certainly, you're not going out there and wait until a service gets going good and people are speaking in tongues or falling on the floor and say, hey, wait a minute. You people be interested in this. Most of this has some kind of sexual connotation, or I bet this girl over here, I bet she hadn't been fucked in about 2 years or maybe never, and she's having it next to, you're not going to do that now, right? But in line with that, let me refer back to the one that I read you where the person was saying that it seemed to them, in a sense, the religion was designed to feed the highest level of those involved. Remember, that's mechanically. Because those involved, if you found a red circuit religion, all it's going to do is mechanically feed the highest level apropos to those people. And in many cases, I was not just being flippant to say that you would have people apparently experiencing some kind of religious takeover, a momentary loss of control, that the Spirit is upon me, or whatever terms they use. I feel like I'm going to faint, or I'm going to lay on the floor. I just feel like I'm being knocked down by some great passion, the guides. And I'm telling you, with a red circuit person going through that, it's what, if we were psychologists, they would say, well, that's some kind of unconscious sexuality coming out. What it is an unrealized sexual activity in the particular wiring system they had, and it can only come loose. Of course, it's not satisfying. It's not going to replace actually getting laid, unless they were wired in a certain peculiar way. But whatever the religion is, that mechanically it can feed, remember I said that observation of it feeding the highest level possible among those involved could be answered both yes and no. It can't get any higher than the mechanical necessities for life itself through those people. And so red circuit people are never going to be fed on the yellow circuit level. You're not going to walk into a white clapboard church in Alabama that says Southern Baptist. You're not going to walk in there. I assume you know it, or if you don't, I'll warn you now and save you time. You're not going in and hear some kind of philosophical, intellectual, scientific, logical, rational food for the mind. I mean, you're not. But it may apparently get you, if you're a certain type, that you almost would lose control and get up and everybody's hollering and they start singing, we're dancing for the Lord, and you might get up and later say, hey, I've never been able to dance like that in clubs. I go out to clubs and it's like my whole pelvis and my ass goes into shock. and I can't dance, I can't turn loose, but by God, something happened. We got there and the tambourine's going, everybody's stomping their foot and saying, we're going to dance for Jesus or the Lord. And sure enough, if I could dance like that at clubs, I'd be murdered with women. And so you could say, I got fed somewhere, but you got fed at the highest possible mechanical level. And it was a red circuit atmosphere, it was food for red circuit people, then the highest you're going to get would be something like that. Person further notes, I'm reading and editing this to make it come out like I want, as you should catch on as why it's not moving. Watching the TV preachers, it seems to be more of the red circuit energy lately attracted to religion. Well, let me put it this way. What they're saying, or I'm going to interpret it this way for you, they're noticing what's available on television, which I pointed out, use the examples. It would seem to be red circuit religion going on, and that is not an unfounded observation. But let me note again for you that most of visible, audible humanity is still red circuit level. try and fit that in with what seems to be otherwise at times, because it is still true. At least you think, although the yellow circuit is exceedingly fast, it is moving at such a rate that it's about to complete itself. Remember, there are parallel times working. The majority of visible and audible humanity is still red circuit. And if you don't believe it, if you can stratigraph this, try and expand it in some kind of instant stratigraph of what you would perceive to be red circuit people in this world right now, and strike them out and see what's left. Don't include me in your scenario, but you try it. I got a few I think I'll just read that I like. I read in a science fiction book that, quote, a city in the future was an unsupervised playground of technology. And it would seem like this is an appropriate analogy for this thing, in that it could be seen as being an unsupervised playground for life itself. Doing the key task, which, I didn't tell you people that was a task, but that was one I said that I thought about, of going to ill-appropriate places and simply say, do you make keys? But obviously some of you just took it upon yourself to go try it, so I'm not responsible. But at any rate, this person obviously went and tried it and said, I noticed a few things. One was I had to ask the question twice normally. It was as though the person I asked was not wired up to hear the question. And it also occurred to me that people did not find the key question humorous at all. P.S. They don't make keys at Merrill Lynch. Another person's comment vis-a-vis religion. In a sense, comic books have plots like most religions. They preach a healthy respect for an adversary and continually assure those involved with them that no matter how sharp life gets, it will go back to normal eventually through the interface of some greater, heroic outside force. This question was asked in regard, some of you people have seen this on tape, may not know, but we do just a few little things before most meetings, and many times I just have the whole group, along with a little rhythm, to just get up and jump for several minutes before we start the meeting. That's all I care to tell you. Everybody gets up and jumps on the beat for a couple of minutes. And this is one of the newer people here that's been exposed to this, but they ask a question. When we are doing things like the hop before the meetings, I notice that some of the people here seem to expend more energy in the jumping than others. And it seems like the largest part of the group does expend energy. My question seems to be, are those who seem to be saving their energy, are they actually receiving more? There are numerous ways to put that kind of question. And some of you have heard this asked before. Some of you have asked it before in other ways. Let me put it to you this way. For the few people, I keep saying the few sometimes, I assume everyone catches on, I'm talking about you if you're here. And it could be correctly noted that for the few, the routine expenditure of mechanical energies of whatever kind are in fact unprofitable, not just jumping. And it does not simply have to be on the red circuit level. It does not have to simply be what would appear to be a strictly are in the main a physical activity. That if you're involved in the routine expenditure of mechanical energy of any kind, you're going to find out on your own that it is ultimately an unprofitable expense. And that's simply it. It's a piece of what I was telling you last week, that the most efficient way to live, once you can see it, once you try it, and in a parallel fashion begin to realize the propriety of it, the necessity of it, that you cannot alter your understanding, you cannot begin to activate systems within yourself that are not normally activated without behaving like this, to wit, the continual act. Because anything less than that, to some degree, is the routine expenditure and transfer of mechanical energy, whether you be laughing, crying, jumping, or laying down. And that the only way to be right now absolutely assured that you're not expending any unprofitable energy, the only way to be absolutely sure is to be engaged in a continual act. That's the only way to be absolutely sure. It's the only fail-safe method, is be a complete sham, to be absolutely insincere in the most sincere manner possible. All right, the task. This one is a question, and I'm going to give you the answer next week. Maybe. I'll give you the answer sometime. My plan will be next week, but I want to see. It's not required everybody give an answer. If you can't come up with an answer, don't hand me in one. What would be the only possible, when I say possible, that in a sense could happen, would be the only possible threat to life that could be staged by humanity? That is, it could occur. Of course, I've given you enough hints. It's nothing you ever heard about. It's not pollution of the environment. It's not atomic warfare. But there is something. And I'll find it myself somewhat interesting if any of you can even get close to it by now. And it won't do to try to take anything you think I've said, because I've never mentioned this. But there is potentially a certain activity that I could explain in a fairly short sentence. It would be the only possible threat that humanity could serve to life. See if anyone gets it. If anyone absolutely gets it, we'll award him a prize. You can be the first pope of the church. If anybody gets it, I'll give you a bigger prize than that. But it's quite simple words. It does not take nothing esoteric in the terminology of the sentence that I could formulate to answer this. Of course, it's the sort of thing that an ordinary person would make sense of the sentence, but they would not have any conception that, well, in some way this could do life damage if it did happen. So it is something that is easily explained, but I have never mentioned it. Several little pieces of ordinary business, and I'm going ahead and leave this on the tape for you people out of town. Things periodically come up, and I become aware of them, and they reach a point, and I have to go back and reaffirm something or threaten. It still comes to my attention periodically that some of you people will speak about me specifically to other people, and that is absolutely forbidden. And that includes cases wherein you might try to talk to somebody outside this group in a highly approving way of my great mystical abilities, magical things you've seen me do or that you attributed to me. Just, ooh, if you were just close to him, if you knew him. You can apparently, or you can be wired up and think that to your own voices that you in some way are doing me and all this good, But if I were staying behind you and I heard that, there's every likelihood in the world that I'd cut you loose from this, because that rule is still in effect. Just don't mention me. That didn't mean just in some routine manner. Do not be talking to somebody else, even among yourselves, but don't even mention my name. I mean, even to say, you know who, the him. Don't do that. That's for a very good reason, and I will do something about it. I know cases where it happens. That is, when you sin, I finally know about it, and I got names. Just because I don't call them out here. And one more that periodically pops up. That's having to do with any kind of casual flirting here amongst you people or in any of the groups meeting anywhere else under the banner of any form of serious interest in this. I will throw somebody out in a minute, I don't care who it is, and you had better watch yourself, because you can't simply claim I was not aware of it. Of any of you people sitting around, let us say you're together socially out to a movie or out eating, some of you together, for you to casually put your hands on somebody else's sexual partner in here, or to be engaged in what under ordinary circumstance out in life could be called harmless flirting. And I'm telling you, I meant it. If I walked in and I saw it, or I got enough information about it, some of you already know are more inclined to do that. All you got to do is take a short nap and fall back into your own voices, and some of you in here are just wired up to do it. But that'd still be no excuse to fall into some kind of little casual flirting with somebody else in here who is already involved with somebody else here. It's not a matter of degree. There's no safety margin in here about, well, I just flirted a little bit. It pops up. Every time I'm aware of it, I don't necessarily mention anything to everybody, but I'm telling you again, I'll throw you out the same way I would. It's not that much different than if I saw you and heard you, had a knowledge of the fact that you had become at least verbally violent towards somebody else in this group. I do it the same way to see you flirting, giving come-on looks, trying to engage in some kind of verbal or nonverbal sexual innuendos to somebody else who's involved with another person here. Some of you better watch it. It happens more times, I know, than I mention it, but I'm telling you again, I'll throw somebody out if I have to do it as an example. And some of you better watch it, because you fall into it. You just had years and years of being wired to do that, and it's not acceptable here. You can't tell me if I ever suddenly turned on you, you can't tell me, well, I didn't mean that. It wasn't serious. I'm telling you, don't do it. In the same way I told you, do not express hostility. I didn't say, to immediately stop feeling hostile towards somebody here. But by God, don't let it show. And I'm, of course, not telling you, I'm not trying to interfere with anybody's sexual drive. God forbid. You should all know that. So if somebody else in here gets your nose open, for you people up north, that means it gets you sexually aroused. I'm not telling you to in some way start trying to ignore your sexual drives, but I am telling you you can do this. I demand you do it. As long as somebody else in this group is involved with somebody else in this group, don't you let it show. Especially if we're talking about a woman, she'll know it anyway. You don't have to do anything. If the time she ever becomes available and you're available. But as long as somebody's involved with somebody else, any kind of flirting around and, tickling people or anything that has to do with true flirting in a sexual sense. And I must tell you, I hate to brag, I would consider myself somewhat of an expert. That is, you can't hide it from me.